In the quiet town of Maplewood, the Johnsons appeared to have a picture-perfect family. With 2 children, Emma and Jacob, and a loving home, everything seemed ideal. However, behind closed doors, 12-year-old Emma struggled with loneliness. Her parents, engrossed in work, rarely noticed her subtle pleas for attention. Every evening, she sat by the window, watching the world go by, yearning for a heartfelt conversation or a warm embrace. Her parents, thinking she was just a quiet child, failed to recognize the storm brewing inside her. Emma's younger brother, Jacob, was lively and cheerful, effortlessly drawing their parents' attention. Emma, on the other hand, shrank into the background, her voice barely heard. She excelled in school, but her achievements went unnoticed. One evening, as she completed yet another perfect test, she hesitated before showing it to her parents. They barely glanced at it, muttering a distracted "good job," before returning to their work. Disheartened, Emma folded the paper and placed it under her pillow, where it joined a growing stack of unnoticed successes. Emma's schoolteacher, Mrs. Lawson, began to notice her change in demeanor. Once an eager student, Emma had become withdrawn, her once bright eyes now filled with sadness. During a parent-teacher meeting, Mrs. Lawson cautiously brought up her concerns, but Emma's parents brushed them aside, convinced that their daughter was simply reserved. However, Mrs. Lawson knew better. She had seen too many children fade into silence while their parents remained oblivious. Determined not to burden anyone, Emma wore a mask of happiness. She smiled in front of her parents, laughed with her friends, and carried on as if nothing was wrong. But at night, when the world was silent, her tears told a different story. One evening, she wrote in her journal, her only confidant. "If only they saw me," she scribbled. "If only they knew." She closed the book, wondering if her parents would ever realize that she was slipping away. Jacob, unaware of his sister's struggles, continued being the bright spark of the family. He adored Emma and often tried to include her in his games, but she gently declined, retreating further into her world. One day, he found one of her journal entries on the floor. He couldn't understand everything she wrote, but he sensed sadness in her words. Confused but concerned, he decided to keep an eye on her in his own way. Emma's sadness began manifesting physically: headaches, fatigue, and loss of appetite. Her parents dismissed it as stress from school, assuring themselves she would be fine. One evening, while setting the table for dinner, Emma felt dizzy and collapsed. Jacob screamed, their parents rushing to her side. The incident was brushed off as exhaustion, but Jacob saw the fear in his sister's eyes. Something was terribly wrong. Feeling invisible, Emma wrote a letter to her parents, pouring out her heart. She left it on their nightstand, hoping they would read it and finally see her. The next morning, the letter was still there, unopened. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she realized that even when she screamed in silence, no one listened. The weight of loneliness became unbearable. Emma began skipping meals, losing interest in the things she once loved. Jacob noticed and tried to talk to her, but she only smiled and assured him she was fine. One afternoon, Mrs. Lawson found Emma sitting alone in the library, staring blankly at a book. She gently placed a hand on Emma's shoulder and whispered, "I see you." For the first time in a long time, Emma felt acknowledged. Jacob, though young, felt a deep sense of responsibility. He didn't fully understand Emma's pain, but he knew she needed help. One night, he sneaked into their parents' room and placed Emma's letter directly on their pillows. He knew they couldn't ignore it forever. The next morning, Emma's mother found the letter. As she read it, her hands trembled. Guilt crashed over her as she realized how blind she had been. That evening, the Johnsons sat down together for the first time in months. Emma's mother held her close, whispering apologies, vowing to do better. But was it too late? Emma's parents reached out to a therapist, determined to mend the wounds they had ignored for so long. The therapist explained the importance of emotional connection and the silent struggles children face when they feel unheard. Emma, hesitant but hopeful, agreed to speak with the therapist. For the first time, she let out the emotions she had bottled up for years. Healing was not immediate. Emma's parents had to prove their love was not just in words but in actions. They set aside dedicated time for family activities, started asking Emma about her day, and most importantly, listened. Slowly, the walls Emma had built around herself began to crumble. Emma learned to express herself openly, no longer fearing that her words would go unheard. Her parents, in turn, learned that parenting was more than providing, it was about being present. As Emma shared her feelings, she realized she was not weak for needing love. Her parents assured her that they would always be there to listen. The home that once felt cold now radiated warmth and understanding. Mrs. Lawson played a significant part in Emma's journey, reminding her parents that teachers often see what parents miss. Grateful, Emma's parents worked with the school to create an environment where children felt safe expressing themselves. Jacob's innocent yet powerful intervention had saved his sister. His parents now saw him as more than just their energetic son, he was a bridge between them and Emma. They encouraged both children to communicate openly, ensuring neither felt neglected again. Months passed, and Emma blossomed. She engaged more, laughed louder, and no longer sat alone by the window. Her parents had transformed, actively participating in their children's lives, understanding that love needed to be shown, not just assumed. The Johnsons shared their story with friends, hoping to prevent others from making the same mistake. Many parents, upon hearing Emma's story, reevaluated their relationships with their children. Emma, once invisible, now stood as a voice for children who felt unseen. She spoke at school events, encouraging her peers to speak up. Her journey became a testament to the power of awareness and parental presence. The Johnsons learned the greatest lesson of all: children do not just need shelter and food, they need to be heard, seen, and loved. And so, they vowed never to let their children's voices fade into silence.